I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility, with leaders and innovators who make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Daniel Sousa Schulman, CEO, MotionSync. On today's episode, we'll discuss how the technology is designed to reduce motion sickness before it even starts. We hope you enjoy this episode. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Grayson. Thank you for having me. Excited about this talk.
It's great to have you here, sir. I had no idea how many individuals around the world suffer from motion sickness and how many individuals cannot sit in a car and read a newspaper, read a book, or even respond to a text message. I had no idea how vast that is. Why is that? What causes that?
Yeah, and that's a great question and a very common misconception. The reality is a lot of research has gone into it, and they have found out that 1 in 3 people are considered to be highly susceptible to motion sickness, right? So it's 33% of the general population that's affected by this problem. Now, a lot of times people don't realize how widespread it is because they're often the drivers, right? So the drivers very rarely get motion sick, but when they're passengers, they might experience that more. Another reason why people might not notice it is because they don't realize the full spectrum of symptoms that are associated with motion sickness, right? So we know nausea is one of them, but the reality is that fatigue, drowsiness, feeling temperature changes, mood swings, headaches, all of those symptoms can be associated with motion sickness, but people don't necessarily associate it with. So sometimes they don't realize that, hey, they are affected by motion sickness. Or in other cases, they make certain behavioral changes they have internalized so much that they don't even notice that the problem impacts them. So, for example, we ask people, do you struggle with motion sickness? And some people will say, no, I just don't use my phone inside of the car. Well, then you do struggle with motion sickness. You're just making certain corrections to avoid it. What if I could tell you that there might be a way for you to be able to be productive in your car, right? So that's why sometimes the problem is not as perceived as big as it actually is.
Did you, in your research that you've conducted, does the I have motion, does that happen when an individual goes from primarily being a driver to riding in the vehicle and you have one of these like, uh-oh moments? Is that when they kind of start to first notice it, or is it something earlier on?
Yeah, so sometimes people have experiences early in life that kind of tells them that they have motion sickness and they understand it. But ultimately, it comes down to a lot of genetic predisposition, right? Some people are inherently going to have more susceptibility than others, and some drivers might never struggle with motion sickness. But oftentimes that shows up first in childhood. Normally, younger people are more susceptible to motion sickness. Some people kind of grow out of it and they lose that sensitivity. But for other people, it just stays throughout their life and it impacts them directly. A lot of people report struggling with this, some people to very intense cases. But it's just that moment of like when you sit in the passenger seat or public transportation and you're first starting to see, oh, I can't be on my phone. I just don't feel something's not right. Or my stomach's starting to feel upset, or I'm starting to feeling excessively warm. That's really when they start picking up on it.
Wow. We're going to get to your product here, PREACT, in a minute with the pillow that you develop, but is the main way that individuals cope without your product is looking forward? Because I've read some reports where if an individual looks out the right side of the window or the left side or they can't see out, it's like, it starts to, I'll use the term, I'm not a doctor, to accelerate the symptoms. Is that one of the main ways they cope, is by looking forward as the vehicle moves?
Yeah. So, and that goes to what causes motion sickness, right? So your body is at all times trying to estimate the motion that you're experiencing. So your eyes and your inner ear and your sense of touch all work together to tell your brain how your body is moving in space. And at the same time, your brain is trying to predict what's going to happen next. So if any of those systems have conflicting information, your brain starts to send these mismatched signals that show up in the form of motion sickness symptoms like we talked about. So if you're not looking at the road, for example, your inner ear might be detecting a lot of motion, but your eyes cannot detect that same motion. And that conflict can cause motion sickness. That's why looking at a phone often increases the incidence of motion sickness. But there are other things that you can do to kind of improve how your brain is expecting certain kinds of motions and reconcile all those sensory systems so that you have a better picture of what is actually going on.
With 33% of the public suffering from some form of motion sickness or another, how do OEMs approach that? I ask because 33% of a pie is a very large market cap or purchasing power to buy vehicles. And we've seen some studies where certain individuals cannot buy electric vehicles because of it does something. Again, I'm not a doctor, but they have to buy the ice because some reports I've read said, oh, it's the rumbling, it's this and that, and they can actually feel it. How do OEMs adapt to this? Do they put things into the vehicles to try and overcome it? Or did you say, wait a second, there's an opportunity here. And by the way, I'm going to start a company called Motion Sync, and I'm going to build a pillow called PREACT, and I'm going to solve it.
No, yeah, absolutely. And, it's not like we're bringing up this problem for the first time. OEMs have been looking into it and trying to find a solution for it. But ultimately, it comes to how do we prioritize what technologies we're developing on a constant basis? And a lot of the times these technologies have been very driver focused, right? So the average occupancy in a vehicle is often 1.5. So a lot of technologies being developed for the driver, but as we shift away from driver-focused technology development to an occupant-focused technology development, that's when OEMs really start to pay more attention to motion sickness, because you're expecting a lot more people to behave as a passenger and to want to engage in all of these different types of tasks as the platforms evolve towards a software-defined vehicle and an increased use in screens. So right now is the moment where this problem has been really gaining a lot of traction in the industry, and people are putting their best foot forward to solve it. And we've been working on this problem for the past 5-6 years. So we've been getting more of an understanding of it so that we can then bring something to the market and ultimately help the end user, which is who we want to really take advantage of the solutions that we're coming up with.
Do you feel that it's accelerating now as OEMs and startups, and tier ones, suppliers are all starting to build autonomous vehicles, where it's shifting from, I'll use the tagline we all know, the world's greatest driver, to the you want to be the world's greatest passenger? You're starting to see that huge shift in the market. If you look at the exponential growth of Waymo, you're looking at what Tesla is doing with Cybercab, and you're seeing what NVIDIA is doing. The focus seems to be shifting to the passenger experience, if you want to say the in-cabin experience. Okay, so if you're not going to be driving, let's give you all sorts of goodies. Oh, wait a second. If you got motion sickness, oh no, this is horrible. I don't want to be on this roller coaster. Is that leading to this shift?
Yeah, and one of the things is with these robotaxis and self-driving cars, they've been facing a lot of regulatory burden to be able to get on the road, right? So that's been their main core focus, dump all the resources into better perception, better, end-to-end neural networks and all of that, and that's great. But ultimately, for people to adopt the technology, you have to take into account the human factors, and you have to develop in-cabin solutions for people to actually enjoy using your product. And that's been kind of the parallel path that's been followed is, okay, we're building all of this to make it work, but to really bring people in and lower that adoption barrier, we need to start looking at user experience, user interfaces. And in that context, that's really where motion sickness comes in very strong.
And you developed the product, which we've alluded to, the PREACT pillow. How does that work? And how is it your pillow, I'm going to simplify this, can reduce motion sickness? Because to me, it seems that if I'm riding in an autonomous vehicle with no driver and I get motion sickness, and I know your product's in there, oh, I'm not stressed out. I'm not getting white knuckled. I'm not like, oh, please be over soon. Oh, this is a great experience. How does the product work, and do you see it eventually integrating into AVs as they scale?
Yeah, so the idea goes back to the root cause of motion sickness, which is a disconnect between your senses and your brain's expectation of motion. So if your brain cannot predict what's going on, that's what causes motion sickness. So we wanted to target the root cause, right? We didn't want to target solving any symptoms specifically. We wanted to address the problem as a whole, and that's where that product that you mentioned come in. And the product itself is a pillow that has some vibrating motors inside of it that buzz you to tell what the car is about to do. Similar to a notification on your phone, but instead of just buzzing in general to tell you there's something coming up, it buzzes on the right to indicate right turns, buzzes on the left to indicate left turns are coming up, and it buzzes on both sides to indicate a brake is coming up. Right? So what that does is it's telling your brain the car is about to do this, and your brain can then prepare itself and fix that mismatch between what I'm sensing and what I'm expecting that causes motion sickness. And then passengers can take a step further. They can, brace themselves during a turn if they feel the pillow buzzing because they don't want to get tossed out the curve, or they can slightly lean into the turn. They can make certain corrections or look out of the window for a brief moment to even improve that effect even further. But really, the idea is targeting the root cause of motion sickness by alerting people of upcoming vehicle maneuvers. That itself is what motion sickness stems from, and we sought out to solve it. Similar to what a driver does, the driver is always knowing what the car is about to do, so the driver is making these corrections subconsciously. Next time you're driving, you can pay attention to it. If you're going to go and make a right turn as a driver, you tend to tighten up your core and lean into the turn. We wanted to provide that same level of anticipation for passengers to have them experience the benefits that a driver has of not getting motion sick. And that's kind of how it works.
It's brilliant. I have a friend that has a vehicle, which I'll remove the name of the vehicle, and it's a manually driven vehicle. And you go around the bend. It's a nice vehicle. It's a luxury vehicle. And you feel the seat on the side of the Venture Gun. I was like, oh, this is interesting. He's like, oh yeah, isn't it comfortable? It holds you in your seat. And so if you stay on that from what I experienced in my friend's luxury vehicle, it seems to me that your PREACT system could be programmed into an existing seat or for a new program for an OEM. Am I right to think that this could technically be built into a pre-existing seat or co-develop a new seat?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I described was our aftermarket product that we can offer direct to consumers, but we've seen a lot of interest from the automotive industry space as well as a built-in solution. So we've been working with OEMs and tier one suppliers on integrating some of our technology with their existing hardware. And what we have found is that there's a lot of high potential hardware already out there in production vehicles that just need to be controlled in a smarter way. If you can make those seats think a little bit smarter and integrate with some of the other advanced driving features that you have in a car, you can achieve very promising benefits from a user experience standpoint and motion sickness mitigation. So right now we're working with them to build our solution in with their existing seats so that they can deliver value to their end user with relatively minor modifications required to their existing seats.
How does your system, I'll refer to it as the motion sync system, how does your system know if the vehicle is going to take a left or take a right? Do you connect into the CAN bus, or do you connect into the vehicle at all, or is it pure sensing? How do you know which direction the vehicle is going to go?
Yeah, so for our embedded solution with, when it gets built in as part of the vehicle platform, we either tap into existing sensors like cameras, speedometers, brake pedal position that come directly from either the CAN bus or Ethernet, and we can make a prediction about what the car's more likely to be doing at points in time so that we can then trigger certain systems within the seat to actuate. But alternatively, what we can also do is if there is a company that already has, a self-driving software platform that has an output prediction, we can just tap into that and adapt that output into commands that then get sent to the seat. We work, on a case-by-case basis with all of these companies, depending on what vehicle platform they're targeting. But ultimately, it's relatively straightforward to integrate it. It doesn't take up too much time since it doesn't require any changes to hardware.
And now I've been in vehicles, plastic seats. I've been in vehicles, cloth seats, leather seats. I was in a vehicle last week and I was amazed at the fabric that they used, the material they used. I said, well, why did you do this? And I said to the company, they said, oh, it's very easy to clean. You put a cloth and you wipe it down. I was like, oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. It was a robo-taxi prototype I was in. Are you limited to the types of materials that your system can go, or is it pretty much you can go across the gamut of what you traditionally might find in vehicles?
Yeah, as far as materials, I would say that's not the biggest constraint. The biggest constraint normally is what kind of actuators you have built into the seat. So a lot of seats nowadays have, your power recliner, cushion lift, and all of that. We can tap into all of that, or if they have haptic motors that are on the seat, we can tap into that. But if you're talking, a bucket seat that doesn't really have any actuators and it's not capable of receiving power from the vehicle and doesn't have any built-in motors, that's where the limitation really is. And in that case, we need to oftentimes add some actuators to those seats. That would be the additional requirement. But in terms of materials, that doesn't affect it as much, besides, cleaning it in case you're trying to put this for someone that's very highly sensitive.
Yeah, so when I think about this, it's common in a lot of vehicles, not all vehicles, very common, the heated seats, cooled seats. Some have one or the other, some have both. Am I right to think about this from a forward-looking, futuristic standpoint where, okay, so you got the heater, you got the cooler, you got the motion sickness. Is that kind of how we should envision this from looking from a future perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, it's going to be integrated with the occupant profile as well, right? So you know that that person's going to be there and they have a preference for a motion sickness routine to be turned on, right? So in that case, you can integrate the seat and you can start, vibrating to tell them what the car's about to do, or using the bolsters to slightly adjust their posture, all those things that we talked about. But it could even fit within a larger set of adaptations that you can make within the cabin. So for example, you could lower the temperature on the AC. We know that that helps. Some people have been looking into aromatherapy as another option. So it could be, part of a bigger package that's just your motion sickness mitigation routine. And that fits within, your seating memory functions or whatever that user interface allows for passengers to select. That's how we plan to see it integrated in the future.
And I think when you look at it from a profile perspective, you're going to have consumers where if it's a robotaxi service and you don't have a profile, they're not going to go to that. I'll give you two clear examples. One, I'll say publicly. The other one, I'll admit for privacy purposes. So I was in Dallas last week and I was riding around in multiple Waymos and I got into it and knew the temperature and it connected right to my Spotify and picked up right where I left off. Like, this is great. And I got into another robotaxi not named Waymo and nothing synced. I was like, oh, this stinks. I was like, this is a horrible experience. And so what you're describing at the profile level, so let's just say hypothetically, I have motion sickness. So it says, okay, we're going to sync Grayson's Spotify. We're going to set the temperature the way he likes it. No, by the way, we know he's motion. So I get in that vehicle. It's like, oh, I don't have to think. Is that ultimately where you see this going?
Yeah, I think so. And not just for robotaxis, I think for personal vehicles as well. That's, your vehicle is going to learn about you and ultimately have the settings adjusted for you. It's kind of like how you have your memory function on your seats nowadays. It knows exactly where you like to be positioned. You can have the same thing for a much wider range of applications, where it's Spotify connectivity, like you mentioned, or it could be, a motion sickness mitigation routine. And that gets built into your profile. In your case, if you generate a profile on their app and you can set your preferences, there are certain questions that we ask to gauge how sensitive someone is to motion sickness that we can then leverage to adjusting these kind of systems for them. All of this is going to be heavily integrated in the future. It's just a matter of, some people are going to be adopting it faster, like Waymo, versus other people might be taking a little bit longer.
Because it was the same thing with, I own a Tesla, and I go, my Tesla, somebody else, my profile goes with me, knows everything I like. And it's just, you become so used to that. And then when you get to a non-profile vehicle, either a robotaxi or personal, like, oh, this stinks. This stinks. So then what scenario do you see? It's because the early days, we're going to have mixed fleets. So you might have some vehicles with the motion sync technology, other vehicles with not. Do you see a scenario where perhaps that the profile knows, okay, I have motion sickness, you get paired with that vehicle, and as it eventually scales up? Because going back to it, 33% of the population is a large percentage of the population. You want to say, no, we don't want your business. You need that 33% if you're going to be a big, powerful business.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely one of the possibilities, you have certain vehicles with some additional capabilities like motion sickness mitigation that you can then direct those to the user profiles that would benefit the most from it. The alternative is you have that equipped in all of your fleet, and then you just turn it on and off depending on who is in the car. That is also a possibility. But, it depends on how fast that rollout is and, how many vehicles that technology is available at any point in time. But ultimately, yeah, we do see that as being one of the paths for deployment.
What we do know, we've said quite a bit, motion sickness is a big problem. How did you come up with the idea for motion sync? What was the inspiration behind solving this, I'll use the term, gigantic issue in the market?
Yeah, so motion sickness has been around for a long time, right? So why now? Well, it's been a problem that I've always personally struggled with. And coming into a PhD at the University of Michigan, they had just started looking into how autonomous vehicles were going to interface with, occupants. And motion sickness has been identified as one of the key adoption barriers. So it brought up the issue to my attention. And having struggled with the problem so much myself, it really raised the question about what can we do to solve it, right? Because I'm a mechanical engineer in my background and, a lot of work in robotics. So we wanted to find a way to non-intrusively reduce motion sickness, right? I don't want to take a pharmaceutical every time I'm getting inside of a car. There should be a way for it. And we started to explore all of these different paths within the university. And two of the technologies that we identified, which is the haptic that we just described, and then the active seat that adjusts the occupant posture, had very promising results in terms of a human testing standpoint, where we tested it out with people and they really liked it. They saw, okay, this is something that, how can I get it tomorrow? So with that poll, we said, okay, there is a technology here and people want it. Let's bring this to market, make it commercially available so that people can take advantage of it ultimately. But it really stemmed from, personal experience and just seeing the problem grow with new technologies.
What were some of those early testing scenarios like? Was it nervousness? Was it, thank you, we're going to solve this? They were like, yeah, I'll try, but wait a second, are you actually going to be able to deliver? What were some of those early testing sessions like?
Yeah, so we had to keep the participants completely blind to the study, right? So we had randomized orders and they came in different days and we had different things done to them at different points in time. And we were just asking them questions over and over again and asking them to report their motion sickness score on a subjective scale. We're also collecting a lot of physiological data using wristbands and sensors mounted on their skin. And they really didn't know what was going on with them. But effectively, there was one condition in which the system was on and one condition in which the system was off. And we're just comparing data across all subjects for both of them. And the quantitative data showed, promising drop in motion sickness intensity symptoms. But what really caught our attention was the qualitative feedback that we got from them, because we did interviews with them after each participant trial. And they were saying, wow, was this even the same route as the last time? It just felt so much better. How does this work? People were just curious, wanting to understand. Some of them said, how can I get this in my car? Is this available? Where can I buy this? So getting that qualitative feedback is really what motivated us to pursue, bringing this technology closer to adoption, because we saw the value and people saw the value in it as well.
It's very clear when you have an individual asking you, is this the same route? I didn't feel so. Oh, okay, to me, there's a breakthrough moment there. There's no other way to describe it. You have this big breakthrough moment.
Yeah, and you could see their eyes be like, wow, there's no way. And that was, just one of the most rewarding aspects of developing technology, when you see people truly enjoy it and want something like it. I think that was very rewarding.
And how wide is motion sickness? Does it go to planes? Does it go to boats in maritime? Is it how wide of a spectrum is that? And are there some individuals that only suffer perhaps in a vehicle or only on a boat?
Yeah, and some people are going to be more sensitive to some types of motions than others. But ultimately, the mechanisms that elicit motion sickness are the same, but the type of stimuli that you're getting to elicit those mechanisms is different depending on what kind of transportation you're on. So, for example, our technology does not work for boats because it requires us to be able to predict very accurately what the next motion is going to be. We still don't have the perfect prediction of how the waves are going to hit the boat, but perhaps in the future, that's something that we can look into. But the type of stimuli that you get in a boat, for example, it's much more short stroke and at a fixed frequency than you would have in a car, where it's much longer stroke and you have more spaced out events. So it will elicit motion sickness through slightly different ways, but the underlying mechanism is the same. And most times when someone is more sensitive to one type of motion, they're also going to be more sensitive to the other. But that's not, a rule across the population. There are some exceptions, but it is a trend that can be followed for the most part.
On the maritime, you do go that way. The NOAA databases, which is open source, and the WeatherNext 2 Google DeepMind data stuff is very fascinating for predicting weather that you could potentially integrate there. And so I'm going to come to the conclusion that motion sickness is not one size fits all. There's certain things that affect one individual versus another individual. Why, in your opinion, are some individuals, they get sicker, they can't ride in EVs versus internal? Have you seen anything in the data that you've done or anything that you've uncovered in your research why an individual might be more prone to getting motion sickness in an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine vehicle?
Yeah, so for electric vehicles, there are two main reasons. So the first one is you have regenerative braking. So regenerative braking is by default more aggressive than your standard, internal combustion vehicle braking. So with higher magnitude of deceleration, higher levels of motion sickness are elicited. That's the first element. The second element of why electric vehicles can cause higher levels of motion sickness is because they don't have engine revving sounds. And this is kind of surprising because passengers subconsciously are using the revving sounds of internal combustion engine vehicles to know what the car is about to do, right? So if I start to hear the engine go, I know that there's an acceleration coming up. If the engine is, like all of a sudden goes quiet or idle, I know that there's a deceleration that's going to come up. And based on this, I subconsciously know what the car is about to do to some extent. With electric vehicles, you don't have the engine revving sound. So there's no way for passengers to kind of know what the car is about to do in an auditory perspective. So that can also increase that mismatch between expectation and reality that we talked about, leading to higher levels of motion sickness.
What role does vibrations play in it? Because with the engine, it vibrates even if you're just sitting still at a light versus an EV where there's very few moving parts as compared to a traditional ICE. What roles vibrations play?
Yeah, so vibrations don't play as much of a role in motion sickness on the standard sense of it, right? So if you're thinking about engine vibrations or just road bumps, those are normally associated with high frequency amplitudes that are not elicited of motion sickness. Motion sickness is normally a low frequency phenomena. But again, to the point of electric vehicles having that engine revving sound, that does play a role where you can tell, okay, based on how the engine is revving or vibrating, I can know what the car is about to do. But the vibrations itself tend to not be the main factor of motion sickness. The main causing factor is really stop and go traffic. That's a very big one. And then sharp turns, roundabouts, things along these lines.
How about hilly environments? If you look at Los Angeles, you want to go from the city to the valley, you go through Laurel Canyon, you go through Benedict. I mean, those are windy roads, up, down, full of traffic, twists and turns. Could that potentially trigger motion sickness in an individual?
Yeah, absolutely. Mountainous regions with a lot of winding roads are often routes that tend to elicit higher levels of motion sickness. People are normally on those routes for a longer period of time, right? So you're like there for at least an hour. So you have a longer exposure that gets your motion sickness level higher up, right? So a combination of the type of route that you're taking, the amount of exposure that you have, the kind of activities that you're doing inside of the car, all of that comes together to elicit motion sickness response. And it all influences people in different ways.
This is a hypothetical scenario. I'm a passenger in an electric vehicle. I'm going from Sunset to the Valley, and I have your PREACT pillow. Could I potentially see lesser symptoms than if I was just a passenger in a general EV going over a hilly mountain situation like that?
Yeah, and that's, exactly what we set out to do is if you're, for example, making those curves, right, and you have the pillow vibrating, telling you, oh, there's a right curve coming up. You can, prepare yourself, lean slightly in, and then there's a left turn. You can lean lightly in. Like the awareness of each one of these motions accumulated over a long period of time can help dramatically reduce the symptoms that you would experience associated with motion sickness. And that's really what the point is. And by not having to necessarily focus on the road ahead, by just having the pillow buzz, you can even be working on your phone, right? So if you have a long road trip, you're going to be 2 hours in the car and you don't want to have to sit there and look out of the window for the whole time. You want to do something with your time. You can take your computer, your phone, and with the pillow vibrating, you can really not disengage from your task at all and still ultimately benefit from lower motion sickness levels.
Let's go timeline here. Day one, I purchased a PREACT pillow. I put it in my vehicle. I suffer from motion sickness. What would you estimate? This is an estimation. From the time that I start using your pill to the time I really start to notice a big difference to the point, and then get to the point where like, okay, here we go, book time. I'm reading a book. What would you estimate that timeline to look like?
Yeah, so in the very beginning, you're not going to be experiencing very much motion sickness at all, no matter whether the pillow is on or off, right? Because you're just getting started in the car. But eventually, as you get accumulated exposure, the kind of response is going to diverge. Now, we see that a noticeable difference happens at the 15-minute mark for people to say, okay, if I didn't have this on, after 15 minutes, I would expect to be a lot more motion sick than I currently am. And that's the kind of amount of time that it takes for people to really start to get up to the level of motion sickness that would make it perceivable for them. On a scale of 0 to 10, we call that a 3 or a 4, where it starts to really kick in and people start to really pick up that, okay, something's happening with me.
That's fast. I thought you were going to say weeks or months. That's fast.
No, because it works it's like a system that works by continuously telling you what the car is about to do. So it's fixing that mismatch at all points in time. So it works by decreasing the rate of accumulation of motion sickness over time, rather than being a kind of a treatment, right? It's just working to tell your brain, here, there's nothing going wrong. There's just motion. And that process of continuously telling your brain ultimately helps you stay at a relatively low level throughout. It's not like you're using the pillow for a week and then the next week you're going to feel better. No, it's like as long as you're using the pillow, your levels of motion sickness are going to be lower because your mismatch between expectation and reality is going to be lower.
So I'll compare this to sleep apnea. So individuals with sleep apnea travel with the machine. Do you envision a scenario before you get fully installed with the suppliers and the OEMs that an individual suffers with this will take the PREACT pillow where they go with them so they can overcome this problem known as motion sickness?
Yeah, that could be the case, especially in road trips. I think that would be when people would be most likely to bring that with them. But I think the biggest use case that we see right now is really for, passenger family vehicles that you have a higher occupancy than one person per vehicle. You often have perhaps a partner sitting in the front passenger seat. You have kids sitting in the back, and the people are normally using the car for multiple sessions, and you just leave the pillow there and you don't really have to worry about it too much. But if you, for some reason, have to switch to a different vehicle, or if you're going somewhere and you really like it and you want to take it with them, you can because it's portable. So it allows for that level of portability, but we anticipate that people are going to be using it in the same car for the most part.
I guess you can look at Cox Automotive, or you can look at Experian, you can look at various different data sets that individuals tend to use the car, but we do have individuals with travel. Daniel, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for pulling back the stigma on motion sickness, because it's really fascinating what you're building with motion sync, because 33% of the population suffers from this, and your solution can fix it. So as we look to wrap up today, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
Yeah, I guess one of the big things is, you don't need to normalize motion sickness. You don't have to learn to deal with it. There are actually ways to manage it, and the benefits can be quite surprising. If you try, ultimately resolving this issue, you might find it surprising how much you can actually decrease it by. So don't stigmatize it too much. Everyone can experience it in some way, shape, or form. So there's nothing wrong with you. Just learn to manage it and you'll be okay. And for the people in the industry, this is something your customers are struggling with, something you need to be looking at. If you're not looking at it already, this is going to be a bigger factor than a lot of people can anticipate in the next coming years.
33% of the population is a ginormous percentage of the population. And the best part about this is, Daniel, you decided to build. You didn't go on, become a cyber warrior. You decided to build and to solve a problem. And to the audience, if there's something you see in the market, build. The technology's there. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is motion sync. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today for a fascinating conversation, sir.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you so much. Yeah, it was great to participate.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as we discuss the physical AI ecosystem with Qualcomm.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.